Malawi, and all protocols observed. My name is Natasha. I am the Communications and Engagement Officer here at the SMP. Before we start the event today, I just have a few housekeeping notes. So thankfully today we don't have any fire drills, so we're good to go with that. And the camera and microphone are right in front of me. So right here in this first aisle, and then the second aisle right in the middle over there. So if you're speaking, please make sure to turn to one of the aisles and your voice will be picked up from the aisle. The toilets are right outside, well, not outside, in the same building, but when you walk out of the door, you take a right and then another sharp right, and then you have your toilets right outside, outside this room. The Wi-Fi in the room is called assembly room, so for anybody that wants to hop on online, please make sure you connect through the assembly room's internet. For everyone else online, please note that this meeting is being recorded, and this will be put up on our website later on today, or if not today, probably tomorrow morning. For those joining us online, please feel free to introduce yourselves on the chat, the organization as well, that would be great, and your email address as well if you wish to. Please note that the chat log will also be put as a resource on our event webpage for the WASH Forum today. We'd also love to ask everybody online to remain muted, and any questions that you may have could be asked during the Q&A session after the event. And if possible as well, if you're asking a question or if you're participating online, please make sure to turn on your camera. We'd like to see your pretty faces today, please. And you're also welcome to live tweet. Our Twitter handle is Scotland Malawi on Twitter. And if you're already not a member of SMP, you're welcome. Well, we welcome and encourage you to join our membership. Anyone that's in the room today, if you want to speak to our head of membership, is Dorothea, right up the front here. And everyone online, please just email us at info@scotlandmalawipartnership.org. And we'll also send a survey link through your email after this meeting. Please make sure to fill out the survey. And after the meeting as well, for all attendees that are in person, we have some tea and coffee outside. So now that I've got you guys' attention, we have a couple of events coming up this year, and I'll just have them shown on the screen for all our participants at home. Our upcoming events of next event that we have is going to be the Sport and Development Meeting, which is going to be on the 9th of February. And then we have the Renewables Forum on the 21st of February. Then we have our CPP and APG on the 22nd of February. And we also have our Youth Festival in March, on the 7th of March. So if you want to register for all of those events, please visit our website for that. And today we have our chair who's online, which is Mr. Aibek Samakov. Hopefully I said it right. He is the International Development Officer at the Hydronation International Center, to whom I'll hand over in a moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everyone here who joined us in person in Edinburgh as well as online. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be chairing this session today. As Natasha mentioned, my name is Aibek and I work at the Hydronation International Center, which is a transdisciplinary hub that brings together the global community, water-related community of practice with a particular interest in Malawi. Last year, around this time, our entire team visited Malawi, and we had a pleasure of meeting a lot of people who are joining us today in person. And in February this year, we are also planning another another visit to Malawi, as well as a workshop, which is very similar to the forum today. So it will be a great opportunity to connect. Today we are very thrilled to discuss with you the data information and knowledge flows in the water-related science policy interface. And today's WASH Forum's theme is officially called Data, Information and Knowledge Flows in WASH, Paving the Way Towards SDGs and the Malawi Vision 2063. The reason we came up with this theme was because if you look at the strategies and targets and ambitions both on national and international levels, such as Hydronation Ambition in Scotland or Malawi Vision 2063 or SDGs, all of them emphasize the importance of data, information, and knowledge in achieving those targets and implementing those strategies. They also emphasize the importance of evidence-based decision-making for implementing those strategies successfully and achieving those targets. And that's why today we are going to be talking about how the decision makers communicate their data, information, and knowledge needs to the broader knowledge-making community, and how the knowledge-making community responds to this data, information, and knowledge needs requests. And we're going to discuss what are the lessons we can learn from there, what challenges are there, and what we need to know to move that forward and hopefully improve evidence-based decision-making for achieving this very important regional and local and global goals. So before we invite our speakers, I'd like to introduce the agenda, which and the link, you can see the link in the chat. Today, we are going to have several presentations, very interesting presentations, after which we will have an open floor for discussion. So if you have any questions, please keep them until that moment. And without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Jon Rathjen, Deputy Director of Water Policy and Climate Change and Energy Directorate Operations of the Scottish Government. And to kick off your intervention, Jon, my question here is: how does your team communicate its data, information, and knowledge needs to the knowledge-making community, and how do you promote evidence-based decision-making in your work? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Aibek, and thank you very much for inviting me to say just a few words at the start of this this discussion today. I've been introduced. So I've been working in the water sector for many years now. I think probably 14, 15 years, something of that order. And I'm currently the Deputy Director for Water Policy in the Scottish Government. That's the bit of my very long title that's important today, I guess. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how government in Scotland communicates its needs for data, knowledge, and research, particularly with a focus on water policy. So I suppose just as a backdrop to that, you know, I think as a government in Scotland, it is a basic principle that we develop policy based on sound evidence. That's a sort of, it's a mantra within government. It's an essential part of how we operate as policy makers. And it's also important that we do that so that we can bring forward policies that the public find acceptable, proportionate, effective. We have to make sure, therefore, that the policies we bring forward are based in reality, that they will be effective in the real world, that they are not simply, for want of a better expression, ivory tower thinking. They are real policies grounded in evidence, and so it's a really fundamental part of how policy is developed here in Scotland. So I'll go back. I think it was mentioned in the introductions, you know, just to sort of say, back in 2013, Scotland set out in legislation its concept of being a hydronation, the idea that we would look to maximize the monetary and non-monetary value of water, to really think about water as a resource that we needed to think about how well we allocate it, how we protect it, how we use it to best advantage. And so I suppose in a way that's the first way that governments communicate their need for knowledge and evidence and research, is by making such statements to say, hey, we think water is really important, we think it's a vital resource, we should be looking after it, managing it more effectively. So that's in a sense, one of the ways in which government puts itself out there and asks people for their views, for their opinions, for their input. We do that by making such bold policy statements, and if we put it in legislation, that has even more power. So I thought it was interesting when you look at the body of water law and regulation in Scotland, an awful lot of it reflects the climate historically. So much of what we have in law is there to manage too much water, or in fact it's absent in some places where we feel we simply had enough water to allocate, so we've not needed to bring law into that space. So I thought for my short intervention today, and it's just 5 minutes or so, I would look at the new challenge, in effect the new challenge of water shortage and climate adaptation. This is coming at Scotland now. It's a real thing, and it's probably the area where we have least well-developed policy in place right now. So climate change predictions for Scotland are that we are likely to experience water scarcity events with greater frequency, magnitude, and duration. We've had water scarcity events in Scotland. So in 2022, there were 175 license variations or suspensions that we had to make to manage water shortage. 2023, another 8 variations to reduce abstraction volumes. So we're starting to actually have to act in the face of water shortage. So we need new policies to face up to this challenge, essentially, to both adapt to climate change and to react to water shortage in a way where really the policy previously has been focused on managing when we have an excess of water or attempting to mitigate climate change rather than adapt to it. So when we're changing policy, we look to a range of sources for knowledge. So we know we have an issue, and we start to go and talk to people. We start to communicate about our need for knowledge. In Scotland, one of the key sources then is academia. So we have CREW, the Centre for Expertise in Waters, and that's a great hub for us because it allows us to ask questions direct to a body that is there, that has feelers out into all the academic world, all the sources of knowledge out there. So I can just go and say, look, I've got a bit of an issue. We need to do some work on understanding our water resources more generally. How much water do we have? Where is it? What quality is it? Can we use it for different uses? I can just ask questions of that centre of expertise, and they can then go out and seek the very best knowledge and introduce me to the very best research and researchers in the field to start to give me access to the knowledge I will need to consider how we might develop policy and bring forward potentially new legislation to face into the new reality of climate as it is today. And we need to understand the impact on rivers, reservoirs, small water supplies, soil, agriculture, industry. Whiskey, for example, needs an awful lot of water to make it. And one thing we cannot have is no whiskey, especially today on Burns Night. With Burns Night coming up this evening, no whiskey is not really an option. So we need to understand how we allocate water to that important industry, along with so many other industries. We also need to have a view to the future as well. As we see things come down the track, we say, okay, we have enough water for everything we're doing today, but what happens if the hydrogen industry becomes really very much more important? How will we make sure we can allocate water appropriately to a new and emerging need like hydrogen? So we have to look into the future as well as simply manage today. So CREW gives us access to those shorter, more focused bits of research, but we also need to see that alongside longer term data gathering. So we have in place longitudinal data gathering, telemetry, to give us trends over time. And that's been really important in understanding the movement in climate change in particular, but just how has that impacted on things like rivers and soils. We have that long range view as well, and lots of long range research that's important to set the short term research against that long term research. And then the process really comes back into government, where officials look at the policies, look at all the evidence we've got, and begin talking to politicians about how we might respond to that. And then we have parliamentary process to apply further scrutiny to that, to test that the evidence we've based our policy on is sound. And that's important as well, so that people can get trust in what you're trying to change because they can see that what you're doing is based in evidence that is certified and is approved and agreed and considered to be the best evidence. So actually that transparency when you bring forward a policy to say, yes, this is our policy, this is what we'd like to do, but we're doing it for all these reasons that are set out here, really soundly evidenced behind with good research and good data and so on. And that's a transparent process, one that is subject to challenge in Parliament. So it's really important that we face that challenge to make sure we really are basing our change on sound evidence. So in summary, evidence sets off a policy process on the right direction. So you gather it at the start to make sure you understand the problem and that you're scoping the problem well. It guides it along its journey as you develop the policy response. And then it keeps it on track over time because conditions alter, new information emerges, and you have to adapt policy over time. Because in short, I guess, policy making is a continuous process. Good policy is always evolving to stay relevant and accurate. And so you always need to be testing your policy against the most recent, most current data sets and knowledge. So the science policy interface, the data policy interface is absolutely crucial to how government makes change in society. So I hope that just gives you a bit of a sense of how we do it here in Scotland. And I look forward to hearing some interventions from colleagues as we go through the rest of this this online event. So thank you very much, and I'll pass back to you, Aibek.
Thank you, John. Yeah, it was very interesting and very good that you mentioned that the government communicates its needs through policy statements. And thank you very much for mentioning the CREW, as well as longitudinal studies, and how the policy process is a very repetitive, iterative process which needs evidence at every stage. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Andrew Jamali, a research manager at Malawi's National Planning Commission. Dr. Jamali, the question for you is the same. So how does your team communicate its data information knowledge needs, and how does your team, as well as government of Malawi, promote evidence-based decision making, especially in WASH sector?
Thank you so much, Aibek, and thank you so much for this interface. Well, straight to answer your question, you know that Malawi has a new vision, Malawi 2063, which is to move the country to become an inclusively wealthy and self-reliant nation by 2063. And we have a 10-year plan that's operationalizing this vision. So you might be of interest that the vision itself is structured in 10-year operational plans, and we started the first one in 2021 to run up to 2030. So within that vision, there are clear, issues that speaks to, what Malawi wants to do in as far as, attainment of this vision. And one of the key areas that you might want to be notified about is how we are influencing the coordinating space for the implementation or operationalization of this vision. So under each pillar and enabler blocks of each of the vision structures that are called the pillar and enabler coordinating group. So these are comprised of either one sector, depending on the nature of the pillar or enabler, or a number of sectors that comprises ministries, departments, and agencies. Their business is to look at the pillar objectives and the key intervention, and then structure in terms of prioritizing which ones ought to be implemented when and how. It also acts as a forum for information sharing on the progress of the interventions that are being operationalized through each of those pillars and enablers. So this is a key forum for us as a commission to get to know the data needs that all these key players operationalizing that particular pillar enabler would be looking for or are actually generating in the course of their interfaces to facilitate either transformation of all those key areas of focus in as far as the vision is concerned, but also indicating whether there are policy, legislative, and perhaps maybe guideline needs that should provide as much evidence as possible to guide operations associated with interventions under each of those pillars. But beyond and over that, we also have other strategic initiatives that we actually undertake to ensure that we are conscious of what kind of data needs are being floated around by various actors in the development space. One of which is that we have some consultations with each of the key players operationalizing agencies for the pillars and enablers of the visions on periodic basis, and that culminates in production of annual reports of progress in as far as Malawi is concerned in terms of movement towards the vision of an inclusively wealth and safe nation by 2063. Suffice to mention that in the next 6.5 years now, almost rounding up the 10-year period that we have for the first 10-year implementation plan, we have two key milestones that are in pursuit. The first one is to graduate the country to become a lower middle income economy, but also push towards meeting most of the sustainable development goals. So within that framework, we also interface with various actors that are pushing interventions that have been identified as game changers, perhaps maybe flagship projects, transformative initiatives, catalytic initiatives across all the areas of the pillars and enablers to facilitate realization of the medium-term development framework, development goals, as well as the overall vision itself. So the sustainable development development goals agenda is being operationalized within the vision initiatives along those lines. So we produce what we call annual progress reports on how Malawi is progressing with the implementation of the vision, what kind of traction and impact is being traced along the footprints as we implement the vision. But over and above that, for the sustainable development goals, we also have some spaces where we report on how we are faring in terms of our efforts to meet most of the sustainable development goals. And the voluntary national reporting system that we ventured into also gives us kind of space where we are able to track our progress towards meeting the SDGs. Another strategic effort that Malawi has put in place to identify the data needs in as far as the development space is concerned relates to the national research agenda. So the national research agenda outlines broad-based research themes and priorities guided by the pillars of Malawi 2063, our vision. So under the pillar of agriculture, productivity, and commercializing, we have got research themes that speaks to issues of legislation, issues of crop diversification, irrigation development, climate smart agriculture, science, technology, and innovations that should spin the country towards an optimally functioning agriculture sector that is also highly commercialized towards 2063. So just to give an example about that, to say that already speaks to what kind of data needs would be required to get things done under each of those research pillars. And any research initiatives that is undertaken by different partners that the Commission has across the space is actually captured and actually put on the National Planning Commission's website, repository for research, to disseminate to various players in the development field, particularly those concerning that particular pillar enabler, to get things ready, pull out the information that might apply to their data needs and information. So in a way, the National Research Agenda, which we launched in 2022, year before, gives us another space where we are able to identify what our data needs are and pretty much move forward to make sure that we supply the required kind of information that should support programs implementation, programs design, reprioritization, and even as well as resource mobilization. So all those are some of the initiatives that Malawi has actually put in place. Over and above that, we also have some other reports and initiatives that the country is actually pushing through. The Integrated Household Survey Program is one of the continuous survey programs that Malawi uses to monitor the socioeconomic trends in the country across various population groups. And we've got in the health sector, we've got demographic health surveys and other specialized surveys that are conducted by the National Statistical Office in collaboration with various partners, key of which is ourselves as National Planning Commission. All those kind of initiatives from the research point of view helps us to identify the data needs in as far as programming for development is concerned in Malawi. Suffice to mention also that we actually engage in a very cross-sector functional approach in terms of partnerships so that we can leverage on expertise and technical knowledge that could be there by various partners in the space. Also harness the possibility of co-collaborating, co-creating, as well as maybe ensuring that there's cross-disciplinarity in terms of research that's emerging from the country's development space. So I think those are some of the brief initiatives that I can speak to with regards to how Malawi is really navigating the terrain of data across all the key development priorities that Malawi has actually put in place. I know that we're talking about water, that falls under pillar number 7 of our vision, environmental sustainability, which is really, presenting various kind of initiatives and perhaps transformative, approaches that needs to be put in place to ensure Malawi's environment is really protected sustainably and utilized for the benefit and sustainability of Malawi's population. I would leave it there, Aibek,
Thank you.
considering that our time is very brief. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much for the very great intervention. And it's very interesting to see, and we were very thrilled when we learned about the pillars and enablers of the Malawi Vision 2063 and how the national research agenda that the National Planning Commission has helped to develop is designed to inform each of those pillars. And I'm sure that there are a lot of questions about that, but please keep them until the end of the discussion. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. So without further ado, we are running a bit late. So I'd like to invite Muthi Nhlema from BASEflow. And Muthi, the question for you is, how does BASEflow or the knowledge makers in general respond to government's requests for data needs? So if you could share some information from your experience on how you respond, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aibek. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I just want to take this very brief opportunity to wish everyone safety. I know that Scotland has just gone through, I believe, 2 storms. So I hope you're all safe wherever you are, you and your loved ones and the country of Scotland. I am going to do basically a slide presentation looking at the question that Aibek has put to me, which is how do knowledge makers respond to government data needs? I'll be sharing an example from some of the work that we've done around the MWAMIS platform, which I will describe in my presentation. As mentioned, my name is Muthi Nhlema. I'm team leader for an organization called BASEflow, but also the theme lead for the Rural Water Supply Network Data for Action thematic group. Yeah, just to give a bit of context or a framework through which we were responding, the government of Malawi had one specific need. The government, and the government of Malawi, in this case, I'm referring to the Ministry of Water and Sanitation, had a specific need. It wanted to understand how many water points were out there, whether it's boreholes or taps or shallow wells, how many were actually out there. And this process was part of updating a document called the Rural Water Supply Investment Plan. It was coming to an end at 2020, and we came in to try to update this particular document so that the ministry and thus the government of Malawi had at least as close as up-to-date information about the number of water points out there and their condition. Now, before I jump into what we did, one thing you have to understand, there have been several organizations, several attempts at trying to provide or respond to the government's data needs. And there have been several attempts, and those attempts have failed. So I want to play a game with you. In this game, what I've put in front of you are some of the reasons why those previous attempts failed. For example, no money. There was no money to run the system. It was too complicated. It cost too much. No one in government knew how to work the system. The consultant disappeared with the system passwords. NGOs are not talking to each other, and so on and so forth. So I've numbered them 1 to 11. So please, I'll give you a couple of seconds to look at the options. And I want you to tell me at the end of the presentation, which one do you think is fake? Which is a fake reason for why those previous attempts to respond to the government's data needs failed? Okay, so I hope you've taken note of which number you think is the fake one. Now, our attempt was part of a program called the Climate Justice Fund Water Futures Program, which was done in partnership with the University of Strathclyde and with support from the Scottish Government. Now, just to give you an idea of our theoretical framework, our thinking when we're going into this work, responding to the government's needs, we understood that the government needed data, so we needed data to be available, but we also understood that we needed to strengthen the capacity of government to use that data so that the data could be used. So that was our thinking as we were going into this work, that we would strengthen capacity of government as well as respond to the data need by making data available. And that way, data itself would be used. So just a general summary of what we actually ended up doing. As mentioned, the program was the CGF program, which was what we like to call the academic phase of the Scottish Government investment in the water sector. Now, I've underlined academic phase, and I'll talk about why later on. Now, this exercise spanned almost 3 years. It was a phased approach over a period of 3 years across all the districts of Malawi. We used a platform called MWater, which is free for people to use, which is one of the reasons why we used it. And also we collaborated with a lot of NGOs, government and private sector to implement this endeavor across all 28 districts, including Likoma Island. And trust me, it's hard to get to Likoma Island, but we were able to get there to map the water points on the island. And the point would be we would update the inventory, as I mentioned in the investment plan, into a system called the Malawi Water Asset Management Information System, or MWAMIS. This is just to show you some of the data that we're able to collect at the end of the exercise. We were able to actually reach 123,000 water points. So these are different types of water points, communal water points in rural Malawi. So we're focusing on rural Malawi. And we also were able to reach about 307 latrines. Now, these were latrines that were within 100 meters of a groundwater source, just to check for sources of contamination. I want to bring your attention to the number 67, which I'll refer back to later on. Now, I just want to recap on our methodology, what we said we're going to do. We said we're going to build the capacity of government to make sure that they were able to use the data. Check. We also said we'd make sure that data would be available so that as we build people's capacity, the data is available for the government to maximize. And the idea was that doing these two things, data would be used. It didn't happen in that way as we expected. And one of the reasons, one of the things we didn't realize at the time, and it only became apparent after we finished the mapping of the water points, it became apparent to us that we as knowledge makers, as we're coming into this process, our thinking or our theory of change was that if we enable data-driven decision-making, that would strengthen state institutions. That was our thinking. But then we realized, as we started the process of trying to work with government to integrate this system for government to use, we realized that actually it's a catch-22. It's the other way around. We need to strengthen state institutions to enable data-driven decision-making. So you see, it's the other way around. We thought that if we come in with the data, and we build capacity for the data itself, that would strengthen state institutions. But actually, it's the other way around. The state institution itself had to be strengthened if data-driven decision-making was to happen. And obviously, that one would argue, but that's not my job. It's not my job to strengthen a state institution. They should do it on their own. And a lot of the time, our argument was, we're having these discussions and we're thinking our job should be just to provide the data and build capacity. We shouldn't be concerned with strengthening the state institution and whether they use the data. We should just provide it and it's up to the state institution to use it. But then we posed a question to ourselves. What's the point of generating unused data? What's the point of generating all this information and give it to a state institution that will very likely not use it? So this was the question that we were struggling with. So as we started to go work with the government more closely, trying to understand their internal systems and how they actually work, we realized that the original data model, use model, or our theory of change was wrong. Actually, the theory of change looked more like this. It is far more complicated. So instead of just data availability, there were lots of aspects around the data itself, its characteristics, its timeliness, the quantity, the availability, the accessibility, and so on. So it was far more complicated than just making data available. But also on capacity, we realized there are other aspects to capacity. And it's not just individual capacity. There's financial, logistical capacity, data and information system capacity, and institutional capacity. And there were two other elements that we realized as we went into the work. We needed to look at the relationships within the state institution. Now, one of the relationships that's a bit fragmented is the relationship between the national level and the district. It's not as strong as it should be. And that would influence the flow and use of data. But also, and this is one of the key ones at the bottom here, are the motivations to use data. There are multiple interests within the state institutions for how data is used or if it should be used at all. But also culture plays a big part in how data is used. But this is the funny thing. The funny thing is, this is something we already knew. In 2017, we conducted a scoping exercise, and I interviewed Zione Uka, who is currently the Deputy Director of Water Resources for Groundwater. And in March of 2017, she told me just that. She said the government has an appetite for data management, but you have to change the culture so people value, share, and use data. So it took us about 4 years to figure out what she told us 4 years before. And she's a government official. So what are some of the lessons from this experience as a knowledge maker? Number one, a conducive data culture was not in place. Oh, wow, who knew? It was something that we were told 4 years before, but we didn't take it seriously. We were arrogant in believing that we knew what we were doing. And the second thing that we realized was that the data response, the way we responded to the government was shaped in our own image. If you remember the number 67, those were the number of questions in the survey that we used to actually map the whole country. 67 questions. The government actually only needed 6 or 7. But at the time when we were developing the questionnaire, our excuse was, we are future-proofing the system, so that we can ask, we can respond to certain needs that haven't yet emerged. So basically, we're trying to solve problems that haven't happened yet. So the government knew what it wanted. It only wanted 6 or 7 key questions. We put in 67. Now, that's not to say it is useless. The thing is, it was made in our image. And I want to go back to what I underlined about the academic phase. The data we have for academics is extremely valuable. But for government, operational-wise, it's not useful. So right now, they actually focus on data that they actually need. The third lesson that we learned is that because of the mismatch between state and non-state timelines, it results in a perception that we're trying to control everything. Now, what do I mean? The government processes take years to happen. They take a long time. And for us, we wanted to get done with it really quick in terms of trying to get it institutionalized, to try to get it in place. Now, as a result, we were clinging, I wouldn't say clinging to things, I would say in the spirit of seeming to help speed things along, the government felt that we were controlling. We created that perception, which was not our intent, but that was the perception we created in the government. Because we wanted to move things along very quickly, they felt, you guys want to manage things yourselves, go ahead. And also, and this is, I would like to commend the Scottish government that in the time that we've done this, the Scottish investment has been flexible and patient. Because of the government timeline, especially when it comes to adopting and using new knowledge, the financing to enable that to happen, and of course, some of it being co-financed by the government itself, if it's external financing, it has to be patient and it has to be flexible. And lastly, and this is in reference to the academic question, academia can't do everything. I think academia is brilliant at collecting data, quality control of that data, quality assurance around that data, and disseminating that data. I don't think it's academia's job to strengthen state institutions. I don't think it is. I don't think an NGO like mine the jury is out whether an NGO like mine should do that. A lot of organizations now are involved in what we call system strengthening. So you'd probably argue to say, yes, maybe it's the job of an NGO. But the point is, different competencies are needed at different stages of institutional development. Now, in closing, let's go back to the game. The thing is, I can't hear all of you, so I'll just be quick because I've taken up a lot of time. I don't know what number do you think was fake? I don't know who's on the mic. You think number one was fake? Okay, no money to run. Okay. Anyone else? Maybe I'll take one more. Which one do you think was fake?
Maybe the group in Edinburgh.
Number 8, no stationery, so no toner in the printer. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And the answer of which one is the fake one here is, drum roll, none of them. All of these were reasons why previous attempts failed. Yes, a consultant disappeared with the passwords. Yes, NGOs weren't talking to each other. Yes, there was no toner in the printer. Yes, no one was around to manage the system. Yes, data disappeared into a black hole. All of these were reasons why previous attempts failed. And I think it's important to know this, because when we were going in, we did not learn from the experience of these past attempts. Had we learned them, we would not have repeated some of the problems that we did. So right now, we're really moving at the pace of government to help them adopt the system slowly. And what I can tell you now is that in meetings now, they actually refer to the MWAMIS system as the system that they're using. We probably just need to work on more promotion and advocacy around more people coming to use the system. But they're moving in that direction. And we've been able to do that by tweaking our thinking in terms of how we strengthen state institutions to enable data-driven decision-making. On that note, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Muthi, for a brilliant presentation. And we really appreciate you taking your time, even though you are struggling with malaria at the moment. But thank you very much. Very interesting, very precise points. And just as a comment, I'd use my role as a chair. So one of the ways to strengthen the institutions could be the peer-to-peer partnerships that HNIC is advocating and putting it forward as a principle in our work. But yeah, again, the jury is out for that, whether it's the best option, but that is how HNIC has been working so far. And again, we are moving, we have to move real fast. So I'd like to invite Dr. Kondwani Chidziwisano, a lecturer and research fellow at the Malawi University of Business and Applied Sciences, known as MUBAS, and a team member of WashTED. So Kondwani, I have the same question for you. So from your experience, how have the MUBAS, or you personally, or WashTED responded to government's calls for data, information, and knowledge? So, and if you could also keep your presentation to 7 minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much for this. I'll try to be as fast as I can. I will respond to the same question that Muthi has been shortly presenting. And let me start with the Sustainable Development Goals. As we are living in this world as a global village, Malawi has a role to play towards the attainment of these goals. And specifically, when we are looking at goal number 6, which is more related to WASH, providing universal coverage for sanitation and water by 2030. And the government of Malawi, as it has already been highlighted by Dr. Jamali, that it has a lot to play to show for the government to say that it has attained the SDGs. There's needs for evidence, and this is through data. You need to monitor progress, but also we need to come up with specific interventions to help us ensure that we attain the Sustainable Development Goals, including goal number 6, which is specifically talking about WASH. So in response to that, as highlighted by Dr. Jamali, we have the Malawi 2063 agenda, and it highlights those 3 pillars. And for Malawi to make sure that it is really contributing to the attainment of these 3 pillars, there's a need for monitoring. And when we're talking of monitoring, we are talking about data. But also, in the attainment of these 3 pillars, we need to have effective interventions that needs to be implemented by the government and other stakeholders. But for us to come up with specific interventions that are really responding to the needs, that's when we may need research to prove that these interventions may really work in a specific context. And in relation to that, that's when the government has the national research agenda to drive research in the country to help filling the gaps that are required towards the attainment of the Agenda 2063, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals. And within the national research agenda, the national research agenda is like an umbrella guideline for the government, and the specific sectors do have specific research requirements or gaps that needs to be filled. We're talking of agriculture, we're talking of health, we're talking of education, mining, and all other sectors you may want to mention. And when we look at health, it's one of the important components. And health has come up with a specific research agenda, which is spanning between 2023 to 2030. And what has been highlighted in this agenda contributes to the attainment of the national research agenda. And if we look at this agenda specifically, it has a number of sub-themes. And one of the sub-themes highlighted in this is the water and sanitation and hygiene sub-theme, which highlights what are some of the key gaps that are required to be filled. We need to provide data, like there's an issue of improving monitoring using various technologies. So we need to come up with such kind of interventions. But also we need to improve access to water and sanitation by the communities, by coming up with the sanitation facilities that are really context specific, ensuring that safe water is accessible by all in our communities. And for that to happen, it requires research to come up with specific interventions that may help to fill up such gaps. So when we say, how do we respond to the needs of the government in terms of the data, we as academicians, we are in the research field, our responsibility is to carry out research that responds to what has been highlighted in this specific agenda from the government in terms of research, because it helps to fill in the gaps that are existing at the moment. Let me give you a specific example of a research study which we implemented in Malawi. We implemented this together with University of Strathclyde as well as London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And it was a research which responded to the needs that were highlighted in the previous research agenda for health. That was the 2017-2022 research agenda, which mainly highlighted some of the gaps. Like there was a need, there was a call that during that time, most of the programs responding to the needs of health and the WASH were really emphasizing much on the nutrition and the WASH in general. Specifically, when you're talking of WASH here, we're looking at the interventions, specifically looking at providing safe water, but also access to sanitation. And there may be a smaller component on the hand hygiene at household level. But then another important component, which was not really being implemented, and there were no specific interventions to help addressing the gaps that were there, were to do with the food hygiene behavior change at household level. You would agree with me that food is one of the major contributors to the transmission of disease in our settings in Malawi. So there was really a need for interventions that may help to address the challenges associated with food hygiene so that we interrupt disease transmission. And in response to that, we designed, implemented, and assessed the effect of a food hygiene intervention on child caregivers practices at household level and this study was implemented between 2017, 2018 up to 2020 thereabout. So I should say that once we finished carrying out that research, we reached a stage whereby we have to give back to the government, because it's like the government sent us to conduct this research through what was highlighted in the National Research Agenda. We conducted the research and we had to give back to the government. And we give back to the government using various ways. For example, coming up with a policy brief like the one you can see here. This policy brief was developed based on the research that we conducted in that time. So when you look at this research process, normally we start with the research agenda, what is there in the agenda. We carry out the research. And when we are conducting the research, we're not doing it ourselves, but we also involve the key stakeholders, including the government. If we are doing a research related to health, then those from the Ministry of Health should be part and parcel. If it is to do with WASH, then those from the Ministry of Water and Sanitation should be part and parcel of the process from the beginning up to the end. So we're able to form up what we call the research advisory groups, informing us what is required and how we should implement this research. Once we have finished, then we reach another stage of dissemination of our findings. As I've said, we disseminate through various ways to the key stakeholders, including the government, coming up with policy briefs, conducting dissemination conferences just to highlight what are the key findings that they need to be taken into consideration. But where I want to emphasize my point is, after we have disseminated the findings, there's a need for the uptake of research findings into use. The government should take whatever we have found and contribute, maybe reviewing the existing policies, or may need them to formulate new policies depending on the findings of the research. And that is why we ensure that the government is involved throughout the research process. But there's a gap, okay? We have the research findings, but now for those findings to be taken up by the government to inform the policy is where I think we are still having some challenges. And this is not a challenge for the government itself, but even we who are involved in research, how can we improve on this? The government itself, but even the other stakeholders like the donors, how can we ensure that we support research uptake into what we have at policy level? That's where we may really need to articulate well if whatever we are seeing in our research is to bring impact to the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, but also the Malawi Agenda 2063. There are a number of bottlenecks that are there to have these such of gaps. For example, the process within the government to review the policy is so bureaucratic and it takes long. How can we improve on that? But also sometimes we are looking at the government stakeholders, the key stakeholders in the government in terms of the research that we have conducted. What is their level of interest for them to incorporate what we have found in our research? Are they really interested or they're not interested? That's another thing which is related to what Muthi was presenting, the interest that they have from the data that we have gathered. Sometimes you can have a dissemination conference where you really need those that are really in decision-making positions. You have that dissemination conference. What you see are sometimes they only delegate people who cannot make decisions based on the research findings that you have. So that really sometimes hinder progress in terms of the attainment of the goals that we have as a nation, but also at international level. Maybe in the interest of time, let me stop here and I hand over back to you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Kondwani, and yeah, thank you for being punctual. So it was a very interesting presentation which tied back to Dr. Jamali's presentation, where the government developed this national research agenda, and here Kondwani demonstrated how MUBAS and WASH respond to it. So it was a very interesting connection there. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Rachel Helliwell, the Director of Hydronation International Center and the Center of Expertise of Waters, CREW. And I'd like you to Rachel to do the same thing. Because in his presentation, John mentioned that CREW was one of the ways how government communicates its data, information, knowledge needs. And if you could tell us more about how CREW implements that and how it connects the knowledge makers and data information knowledge needs, that would be great. And you also have 7 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was a warm-up. Okay, thanks very much, Aibek. I'll be as quick as I can. I realise we're quite short of time. So I'm Rachel Helliwell. I'm the Director of the Centre of Expertise for Waters. I want to acknowledge my fantastic team who are really behind the delivery of the excellent work. from the centre. Let's see if this works. Yes. Oh, maybe you, right, okay. So today I'd like to cover the remit of CREW, discuss our community of practice, say a little bit about how we transition from data to decisions, and most importantly, the impact on the work we do. Okay. So the Centre of Expertise is one of 5 centres that's funded by the Scottish Government, and our purpose is to provide the best available scientific advice to inform government policy in an efficient, accessible and streamlined way. And by efficient, we mean in relating to accelerating the translation of science to policy. Accessible relates to open access of our publications, which we focus on making them accessible and written in plain English for a non-academic audience. And streamlined in part relates to outputs being readily usable by policymakers. So CREW's remit. CREW's work reaches from the source to sea. It covers groundwaters, surface waters, and estuarine environments. And then management in rural and urban contexts. And our projects are very much set within the overarching consideration of water and society. And you can see the 3 main themes highlighted here on the right. And you will hear if you go to any of our conferences or meetings that the main aim of CREW is to ensure that the right information gets to the right people in the right way and at the right time. Our mission is to inform water policy, and Jon did a brilliant introduction to this. We provide actionable recommendations gathered through evidence-based research and expert knowledge. And through delivering this bespoke knowledge and exchange events, our aim is to make a change and make a difference. Now, Jon, again, gave a nice introduction to this. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the way CREW works, which is very different to some of the other presentations today, is that the work that we deliver is basically demand-driven from our requesting organisations, whether it's Scottish Government or their delivery partners, such as the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, Scottish Water. So they come to CREW when they have a question that needs answering to help them make decisions. And it could also be the water industry coming to us, wanting to know more about how to reduce their emissions from their treatment technologies. It's incredibly broad what we address. We also work very closely with a whole range of partnerships within Scotland to make sure that we get the right information to the right people at the right time, as I mentioned previously. Now, in terms of data and data feeding into that information and knowledge process, we work with 21 research organisations, whether it's universities or institutes, and they're listed here. And they cover a combination of economics, social science, natural sciences, to address these really complex real-world challenges. We have about 350 academics in Scotland working for us, providing that really valuable information to help decision makers. And within CREW, we also have our Register of Expertise, which is a go-to platform for anybody seeking a specific skill or expertise. Now, we don't just rely on research from Scotland. As Jon mentioned and others, the challenges that we face going forwards are getting very extreme in terms of water scarcity and drought and floods. And we're very much drawing on that international literature and learning from events such as what's happened in Malawi recently with their extreme floods. You know, there's so much to learn from that, so much knowledge, and we're very open to really strengthening our partnerships and relationships with our colleagues online this morning. So here you can see the whole community of practice. This is how we work. It's a complex picture, but this is what you need in terms of interdisciplinary research to answer some of these more complex problems that faces today. I'm going to skip this one for a bit shorter time. So here, I just wanted to show the pyramid of data, information, knowledge, and wisdom in the context of CREW. I've pushed this a little bit because really you shouldn't use it in this way. But I wanted to demonstrate here that data is critically important, but within the CREW, we don't sponsor or fund research which to collect new data. So we leave that to the universities. That's their bread and butter. They're publishing high quality papers, drawing on great literature. They are the ones that have got their fingertips on that information. What we do in CREW is we work with the academics and work really closely with our stakeholders to make sure that we are co-constructing, working together, and really making sure that science is working hard for us to provide the evidence needed for our decision makers. And if you just go up the pyramid here, you can see how the data, the context of the data drives the information, which drives the knowledge, that gives us that wisdom to make decisions, to make impact. And that's what it's all about. Jon said we needed to really work to have like pragmatic, real solutions to real data challenges. I just wanted to show here that one of the main aims of CREW is to make sure that we disseminate our outputs to a wide audience. You know, we deliver to the project requesters, but actually there's much wider relevance, and this is Scottish funding. Like we need to, sorry, got Scottish government funding, so we need to make it work hard. So we deliver our basic reports that are shown here. We also, for every project that we deliver, we produce a policy brief. We, depending on who the recipients of the data and the outputs of our work are, we can produce, I don't know, an information card for a farmer to have his tractor as a little reminder. But we are very, very keen on making sure that we deliver our projects and our outcomes, like large events like World Water Day, which a little plug there is happening on the 22nd of March this year, and the Hydrogenation International Centre is actually coordinating that. So there's a whole range of different outputs that we deliver. I don't think I'm going to say anything more because I'm probably running out of time. But just to finish, just want to leave this quote up for you to view while we have maybe the discussion. So I'll draw my presentation to an end, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for a great presentation. Yeah, and thank you very much for tying back to Jon's initial presentation, so it makes it a good roundup. So using a privilege of a chair, I'd like to start the discussion round with a question to the whole audience, and maybe particularly to Jon and Andrew. So what happens when the data which is generated upon government's request doesn't necessarily agree or contradicts the policy targets or policy visions, etc.? So how do your teams and governments deal with the data that doesn't necessarily agree with policy priorities? So that would be the opening question, and after that we are ready to take questions both in the chat as well as from the room. Who would like to take this question?
Well, let me start.
Thank you.
So, I mean, that's a very interesting question, because I think that already speaks of a disconnect between data producers and data users, which must be addressed. There shouldn't be a context where, unless if you're doing that for basic research or general knowledge or general information, generating or gathering, but there shouldn't be a context where data is generated and the targets to which it is pointing seems to be, uncomfortable with it and pretty much, so to speak, dislike what's coming out from it. So that speaks to a context where that needs to be resolved. And how do we get that resolved? I'm getting to your question. We get that resolved by drawing on the table the data users in conceptualizing our data generating initiatives. If we're doing a research project or a research undertaking, then possibly we have at the back of our mind those that would have to use the output from that research. And it's very unfortunate that sometimes, and most of the times, these are only engaged at the dissemination stage, when they ought to be part of the conceptual, package of that whole research, initiative. Now, in the context of Malawi, where that has happened, that research either might not be acceptable because it doesn't speak to what was expected of the users, or it brings out discomforting outputs for the users. So those are two different contexts. In the first context is they may not have been interested with what was emerging from the research, and that's going to be difficult to get it up the ladder in terms of uptake and scaling up. In the context of Malawi, engagement has always been the priority. So we continually engage and put the whole research output in a package where this should be acceptable by those that are looking for it and those that should make sense of it and decide on what needs to be done about it. You see, the whole idea of coming up with a national research agenda was basically to situate policymaking processes and programs prioritization and development in a particular direction that is acceptable to the policymakers, the data generators, and those that are going to be using it in the development space. That is a very critical stage because each one of us are interested. We have conceptualized together, we have identified the data gaps together, the generation has been done, and the output is being relayed. And so all we're waiting for is uptake and scaling up in terms of utilization. So the national research agenda in itself really provides a space where even government would not have to say, we don't accept these research outputs, because they are actually reflecting what has been designed by government in terms of what knowledge needs to be generated to fit on what context. In the other situation where results are kind of discomforting for government, then obviously some kind of reflection needs to be done. How best now do we use these results productively in as far as, while we understand that this is a discomforting news, things to do with perhaps maybe a practical case would be the fertilizer input program, the AIP. There have been calls and models of revising the AIP programming in Malawi because it's not economically sustainable. The impact has always been challenged by various factors, including adverse climatic conditions. Research has been done around that to provide models of refining and redesigning the whole AIP program. So that's a clear picture where government cannot run away from saying we need to do something about this. It might be discomforting because of maybe some political undertones associated with the output, but still more, it demonstrates that there is something that needs to be done about that particular issue in point. So, I mean, that would be the quickest reflection I would make on your question. Over.
Thank you, Andrew. And John, if you could give a very quick response, and then we'll open the floor for other questions. Well, I think, I think John can answer at the moment, but I see the hand from Hudson. So please turn on your microphone and put your question.
Thanks. I want just to thank how Dr. Andrew answered. That is a true reflection on the ground. As Malawians, we have a vision. Any intervention that will come should follow the way Malawi wants to do it. Because all presentations they're saying government is a failure, government is a failure. Government is not a failure, but the government has its own interests. As we are working in the government system, work according to the interest of the government. So if NGO is coming, first of all, they need to approach the government, and the government will tell them where area to focus. From that is where they can start writing proposals, how they can do based on that area, rather than writing a proposal and going to the government and saying, we have this for you. So government, it takes a time to respond. Why? They need to adopt the system. They need to learn how the system is useful to the government and to the citizen of the Malawi. As we Malawi, we are suffering so much, and the government is looking for those needs. People, they don't have boreholes. People, they don't have water pipe. So with those issues, you find someone they're saying, we have 6, 7 boreholes allocated to this area near to sewage. These people that are drinking contaminated water. Yeah, it's true. But the government cannot go and address that as quick as possible, because we have some areas where they are using streams until today. So they will be looking for that data first to be addressed according to financial crisis that is our country is facing now and again. So everything what they are presenting is true, but first of all, they need to present what government wants to be presented, not what they think they can be presented based on academic. Academic is another way. Government, they are working according to the culture and doctrines of the people. It's what I want just to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Hudson.
That.
Thank you, Hudson. I see Kondwani's hand. Kondwani, you can make your intervention.
Yeah, thanks very much for the time. I just want to highlight that we're saying that we are not really pointing fingers at government to say that each and every time government is not responding to the needs in terms of the research findings. I can give some examples on how we have engaged with the government in ensuring that it is uptake of findings from the research that we have conducted with them. I can specifically give an example on the writing of the National Policy for Sanitation and Hygiene. We were involved, and this was from the research that we did together with the government, including the training program for the village health committees at village level, which also includes issues of water and sanitation. And also, I should say that we have regularly engaged the government through the research advisory groups. So whenever we are carrying out research, before we start the research, even before we say that we are writing, even at the stage of writing a proposal for research, we always seek support from the government to say, do we need to go ahead with this proposal? Once we have funding for that, that's when we also involve the government through forming research advisory group that has representatives from the government advising us on how we move on with the research. So it's like an iteration process to ensure that whatever we're doing should be accepted at the final stage. That's why we have managed to even, we have been successful in terms of uptaking some of our findings into our government policies. In addition to the same, we keep on engaging with the study participants as well as community at large to make sure that this should be a process that has to be there all the time. But what we are saying is maybe there is a need to keep on looking on how we engage with the government in terms of research uptake in order to ensure that the process should be somehow easier for the researchers, for the government, even for the beneficiaries of the data that we're gathering. Thanks, and over. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Kondwani. Muthi, I see your hand, but let's first turn to the room in Edinburgh. Are there any questions from the room? I can't see any hands, but I think is there a question? Chad, could you please help me if there's a question from the room?
Of course, Professor Morse has a question.
Tracy has a question, yes. I actually have 2 questions, so I'm going to be cheeky. The first one is kind of very specific. So I'm aware FCDO are putting funding into Malawi at the moment around system strengthening. So coming back to Muthi's points earlier, I don't know how much engagement Muthi or Jon has been had with that process to ensure, Andrew for that point, to ensure that the lessons learned, the things that Muthi's sharing there from that whole process are something that's built upon and not revisited, shall we say, in that way. And the other one is probably more to Rachel. Sorry, Rachel had her hand up for a question as well. To say, I know what academics are like, and it can be very challenging to get academics from across different institutions to work together, for example, and different expertise. And I'm very conscious, coming back to Jon's comments, these are not disciplinary challenges we face. It's not just water. We need to be looking at other planetary boundaries and things as well. So what kind of processes can we learn from CREW to bring those interdisciplinary teams together to provide that advice to government that can perhaps be translated into how Malawi could improve on that system as well? Sorry to put two.
Well,
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Tracy. So the first question, was it the question to Jon and Muthi?
Probably to Andrew and Muthi, really.
To Andrew and
about
Muthi, yeah?
FCDO engagement with the water sector and how the learning from previous programs is feeding into that system strengthening program, if it is.
Sounds good. Muthi or Andrew, if one of you could take this question, and then we'll go back to Rachel.
Okay. Thank you, Tracy, for the very difficult question. There has yeah, no, it's okay. That's fine. There has been some engagement. Of course, FCDO at some point through other platforms, like for example, I believe it was RWSN and a few other platforms. They have been seeking input into their system strengthening program. But from what I understand, they've gone ahead. I think they did issue a call for proposals sometime last year. And I know a few, and I think the requirements were a bit strict. I think they said you had to work in a certain number of countries and combine a certain number of countries, if I'm not mistaken. So I know that, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that that call was put out, and the focus is on system strengthening. We'll have to see once they finance the work if they will take on the lessons that were gained. So, but I don't really know in detail. I cannot speak authoritatively as to whether FCDO actually took on any of the lessons that have been learned from our work or works like this. That would be my response.
Let's hope Dr. Jamali can take that message.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. And Rachel, if you could, and I see Jon's head. So first, if Rachel, you could respond to Tracy's question, and then we go to Jon, and then we have two questions in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Aibek. So yeah, it's very interesting what you say, because many of our water resource management issues are kind of multifaceted. And I think academics naturally like to work in siloed kind of disciplines, but what we've noticed within CREW and generally our work at the Jamestown Institute is, you know, I think that academics are reaching out their comfort zone. They understand that, you know, if you're interested in reducing flooding through nature-based solutions, that to look at slowing the flows, you've got to have a hydrologist, you've got to have an ecologist, you're interested in the biodiversity and the carbon, and there are so many other multiple benefits that reach across policies. And to successfully attract funding, you have to work together. And you know, and we're talking very much transdisciplinary as much as interdisciplinary working. So CREW, we've changed our model actually over the various programs to allow more than one research institute or university to put in a proposal. So we do get that kind of cross-fertilization of ideas and delivery. So you know, so messages to Malawi is, you know, I think the added value and the benefit of working across disciplinary areas is, you know, it's just essential going forwards. Otherwise, we are never going to make progress in answering some of these tricky questions. So I hope that kind of vaguely
Thank you, Rachel. I'm aware that you also have a question, but we'll come back to you in a bit. John, you have a question or comment?
Thanks, Aibek. Yeah, no, I apologize. I lost connectivity for a moment, but I think I picked up some couple of things aimed in my direction. So I was just going to say, I think one of the good things about increased public scrutiny in the UK and public accountability in the UK is that government has to be much more open about what interventions it's making in an international development context. And as such, we do share information with our UK government colleagues to a greater degree than perhaps we used to. And so the learning is actually better shared now than I think it has been historically. So FCDO do show an interest in the work that the Scottish government does in Malawi, and we do have discourse there around lessons learned and different approaches. So I wouldn't go so far as to say it's joined up. That would be a bit heroic, but it's I think because there is now public scrutiny and public expectation that we put information out into the public domain about what work is ongoing and how money is being spent and how time is being spent. Actually, there is a better conversation than perhaps there has been for many years. So, and that also extends out to some other European country partners as well, who we also have good dialogue around. So I would say it's lessons learned are being shared better than before. Is there room for improvement? Yes, for sure there is, but it's actually a more promising picture than perhaps it has been.
Thank you, John. So now let's take 2 questions from the chat and then we'll go to Catherine. So Andy from Changing Lives Malawi, you have a question in the chat, right? Would you like to read it out? Andy, Changing Lives Malawi. Here you go.
Hi there, sorry. Yep.
No.
Yeah, I'm a civil engineer, so a lot of this political stuff's probably going above my head, to be honest. I'm more sort of boots on the ground, and we're looking to do a wastewater treatment plant. Started very quite basic, really, and it's just about funding, really. Does anybody have any leads that I could chase up for funding? So it's a wastewater treatment plant and hydraulic ram for moving water uphill without mechanical electricity, and then a drip feed irrigation system.
Thank you, Andy. If anyone has any suggestions off top of their head, it's better if you put it in the chat, because that way Andy could actually copy paste it and follow up on that, right? But if anyone wants to respond to this question right away, please let me know. Otherwise, we have also a question from Azra. Azra Meadows.
Hi, yes. Hello. Very interesting presentations. No, I was wondering, in terms of involvement of local communities on the ground, if they can be brought in partnership to co-lead some of the projects. It will give them a sense of ownership of the actual project and also the sustainability, the long-term continuation, which on the ground, I mean, they're the people who are going to be facing all these, challenges. Is there much of that in the partnerships or projects which have been quoted this morning? Thank you.
So Muthi, maybe you would like to comment on the example that you gave. What was the involvement of local communities in that data collection and maybe data treatment and then data communication?
Yes, okay. I think because of the nature of the work, the engagement was more at the district level and national level. So I think, and looking at data management and investment planning, that function rests with government. So it's the government's role to manage the data and to use the data to actually make decisions to improve the livelihoods and the life of the citizens of the country. But in terms of the mapping exercise itself, we worked with community extension workers who are based in the community. So these are health surveillance assistants, community development assistants, and so on, who are based in the community, so they know the areas better. So we trained this body of people who would go out to actually collect the information. And of course, the information, we got it from the communities themselves. So it wasn't just information that was generated outside of that. It was enumerators, government enumerators going out into their catchment areas to meet communities they know. So that in the work that we did, trying to establish MWAMIS, that was the level of community engagement at the village level. But a bulk of the work is at district and national levels for the sake of informing decisions to improve people's lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muthi. And of course, the involvement of local communities is very important in any project, but when it comes to the data information knowledge flows, it also becomes very important because there's such a thing called indigenous local knowledge or citizen science. And I know that in the room in Edinburgh, we have a hydronation scholar, Donald Robertson, whose research is on citizen science. So Donald, I was wondering if you could also comment on the involvement of local communities in generating data information and knowledge, and how is that communicated or passed on further. Sorry for putting you on spot, but I was just wondering if you could comment on that.
No problem. So yeah, it's a good question. I think so. My research is looking a little bit about the interaction, I guess, between institutions and local communities, specifically around kind of water monitoring and water practices. I think community engagement is a really high bar. So it depends on how you define what you mean by community engagement or community ownership in a project. There's a lot of nuance and detail around it. I think it's, as Aibek says, there's a huge amount of value and a huge amount to be gained by doing it. I think we've learned through many decades of kind of top-down only approaches can often lead to unsustainable outcomes. So it's a great question. I don't think there's a simple answer. I think that's the ambition. It's just how you do that, how you realize that ambition is the tricky part, and that's partly where some of my research has looked at it as there's a huge community of people who look at that sort of thing. So it's a great question, but I'm afraid there's no easy or simple answer to it.
No. Thank you, Donald. And Kondwani, do you want to respond to this question, or is it another question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment on the involvement of communities. In our research projects, we have tried as much as we can to hear from the communities themselves. I can give an example of the SHARE project, which I have presented as an example of the projects we have done. So that project involved the designing of interventions that can help to improve food hygiene practices at household level. So at one stage, we had to ensure that we're also hearing them, the community members themselves. So there was an element of co-designing to say how best, for example, if we are to have a hand washing facility, how best do you want this hand washing facility to be positioned so that it should be incorporated in the actual designing of the intervention. So there's always co-designing of the interventions that we are trying. And importantly, when we have finished conducting the research, before we even take the findings to upper levels, we ensure that we have given a feedback to the communities that were involved in the research process, just to make sure that they agree with what we have found, and then there's that element of saying that they support what we are saying maybe could help improve our service delivery in their community. So I just wanted to add those points. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will have two final questions and we'll have to wrap up. So we have a question from Catherine, and after that, Muthi. So Catherine, the floor is yours.
Hi there. I just want to say great speakers and very good presentations. I'm Catherine. I'm a UCL undergraduate student, and I'm currently working on my dissertation where I will be looking at the Scotland Malawi Partnership. Obviously, the partnership aims to be mutually beneficial. So I'm kind of looking at whether it achieves this purpose and kind of can counter paternalism, which is always a downfall in kind of traditional forms of development. And I just want to say that the speaker's points about the playoffs between government agenda and their priorities, kind of in relation to data needs and community needs, was really interesting. I will be conducting interviews for this dissertation. So if anybody in the chat or any of the speakers would be interested in being involved, I would love the opportunity to interview and get a little bit of insight into this kind of in creating this equal relationship and how well it's going. It kind of was already touched on, but obviously when formulating policy from data, there are different actors involved. You mentioned NGOs and academics and things like that. So obviously data is a very bottom-up approach, as was just mentioned in the last question. It's about incorporating the consensus of local communities, but once it is uptaken to findings by the government, how are the ways the Scotland Malawi Partnership can aim for this bottom-up approach to be included in the policy making side, and kind of how it aims to help the government ensure that the community's consensus are included in the policies to water.
Thank you, Catherine. That's a great question. And so let's hold it. Let's also hear Muthi's question, and then we will try to answer them together.
Well, no, mine is just two very quick comments. Just wanted to firstly comment on, I think there was someone who commented to say that some of the presentations were painting a picture that the government is a failure or is to blame for some of the failure. I'm guessing that maybe because the word fail was in my presentation, I'm guessing it might have been thinking I was referring to the government. So I just wanted to just clarify. The list of why the previous attempts failed was in reference to external attempts at trying to support government to update or to have some kind of management information system. So these were external attempts that were tried. And I think some of the comments that were made are right on point. Some of those things failed because they didn't engage government from the beginning. And in some cases, we made similar mistakes because we didn't learn from those. But realizing that, we changed our approach and tried to be more patient and to move at the pace of government in terms of their processes, their systems, which is why at the end of the presentation, one of the things I said is that government, there's far more ownership of government at the moment of the system, and they're the ones driving it. And we are basically, in a way, backstopping that process. So I just wanted to just comment on that. To concur with what Kondwani said, to say, I don't think anyone here is blaming government at all. And because the government is doing what it can with the resources that it has, and our role is to support them where we can. The second comment I want to make is one concerning community ownership. And this is just a personal philosophical reflection from me. I think as a Malawian who works in development, I feel that sometimes, not all the time, sometimes the focus on community ownership can sometimes result to burden on communities themselves. Because there's a lot of focus and not a lot, but I think there's this sort of unchallenged axiom that community ownership is the way to go, but sometimes it might be seen as an abdication of state responsibility, and you are then burdening the communities more in the name of ownership. So this is something that I've been reflecting on personally in a sort of philosophical way. And as an organization, we're trying to sort of reframe the way we work with communities more because of that. So I just wanted to share that reflection as well, just to reflect on when maybe there's a line when ownership becomes a burden. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muthi, for great responses. Unfortunately, I think Hudson, who asked this question about failure, he already left, but yeah, your response will be recorded. So I was wondering who from Malawi Scottish Partnership, I see Linda was here, or from SMP would like to take Catherine's question about how you guys ensure that there's this equal partnership, as well as the involvement. How do you ensure involvement of communities into the data production or something? Please, Catherine, correct me if I'm misrepresenting your questions, but yeah, who can take the question either from SMP or MSP side?
Aibek, I'll answer on behalf of the Scotland Malawi Partnership, if I may. It's Stuart Brown here. Just to say that we're working to support Catherine with her undergraduate dissertation at UCL and to signpost her to various members of the SNP in the sectors that she's identified. One of these sectors is water, and hence Catherine's interest in taking part today, and the mention to the whole group that anybody who's interested in being involved in interviews would be very welcome. The premise of the Scotland Malawi Partnership is about dignified two-way people-to-people partnership in which both nations benefit, as you know, and it's that spirit and approach in which we engage in all of our activities. So we'll be working to support Catherine with her work.
Well, thank you very much. And Catherine, I hope you've got a satisfactory answer to your question. So since the time of the event is coming to an end, let me quickly summarize what we've discussed here today. So one thing seems very clear, that everyone around the table agrees that data, information, and knowledge is fundamental, and is fundamental for achieving any national, international, or regional strategies, or local, regional, global targets such as SDGs, or strategies like Hydronation or Malawi Vision 2063. So there's no question about it. At the same time, we've seen that both the governments, decision makers, as well as knowledge makers have been working really hard to make sure that that data, information, knowledge flows freely between the decision makers to knowledge makers and the other way around, and the data, information, knowledge needs are communicated in the most effective, efficient, and straightforward way. So there are attempts from both sides to make sure that this thing is happening. At the same time, we've seen from the presentations here and from the reflections that, of course, there are some challenges that can be linked to the policy and knowledge making timelines. They may not match institutional and other capacities, as well as other, like, more of a philosophical things on who should be involved in this process, such as should it be limited to the conventional knowledge makers such as NGOs and institutions, or the local communities, and citizen science should also become a cornerstone of this data, information, knowledge flows. So I think I think that we've just scratched the surface of these very important topics, and I feel like these things need to be discussed further and explored further. And I also would like to use this opportunity to say that in February 2024, this year, in about a month from now, the Hydronation International Center team will be heading down to Malawi, where we have co-constructed a series of workshops with partners in Malawi, which will be dealing with barriers to data, information, knowledge flows. And we will keep everyone posted about the progress we make, and we'll be more than happy to hear your feedback. And if you're in Malawi, we'll be more than happy to meet up for a cup of Malawian tea or coffee. So on that note, I'd like to wrap up this discussion. Thank you very much for taking your time to make very interesting presentations and ask very interesting questions. And here I'd like to pass it back to Chad and Natasha from the Scottish Malawi Partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I know we're a little bit running over schedule, so I'll keep this very quickly. We just obviously want to say thank you on behalf of the Scotland Malawi Partnership to everyone today. About a year ago today, we had a water forum, and we intentionally wanted to shift it into a wash forum, feeling it was more inclusive of a lot of our members in their areas of work. So this is technically our first wash forum, but I'm sure you can appreciate that today will definitely not be our last. We're definitely committed to continuing this platform for everyone to share. That's what's most important to the Scotland Malawi Partnership, is to be a forum, or several forums, where all our members can come together and share and maybe escape their silos a little bit. working collaboratively together between Scotland and Malawi, and we've seen great examples of that today. One of my major takings today is when we were talking and thinking about how hunger, often we know it's not an issue of is there enough food, but whether that food's in the right place at the right time. And looking at water is the same thing. I know between living in Malawi for many years and being here in Scotland, we have plenty of water in both places, but do we have it in the right places at the right time to use it effectively? And now we've kind of shifted on to data. We have plenty of data and data, however you want to pronounce it, but is it in the right place at the right time? I primarily would like to thank our forum chair today, Aibek, for doing the lion's share of designing this event. He and I have been working together for several months. It's been quite an enjoyable process, bringing on board all the presenters today. And Aibek was supposed to be with us today, but ScotRail let us down. And so, but thank you, Aibek, for chairing even online. And it goes to show what we can accomplish in this day and age. And it was a fantastic balance between our members here in Scotland and our partners in Malawi. So thank you once again, all of you who have presented and contributed today. We will, on our past events page, try to put out some summary bullet points of today, and the recording will be made available as well if you want to go back through any and all of the information that was shared today, along with the presentations will be shared on that. It was mentioned at the beginning, but all of you, even you in person here, will receive a survey link, and we beg you, really, if you could please take 2 minutes to do that. It's a very quick survey, and very important for us, not just for our reporting and our funding, but to get feedback from yourselves on how to program things going forward. You'll find that, like I said, in your inbox, hopefully within a minute or two. So thank you for all the attendees, both the people who joined us in person today. It's fantastic to be together here in the city chambers, but particularly for all of you online for joining us. Thank you to Natasha also for settling us in at the beginning, and we'll see you at one of our next events. Thank you very much.